The storm hit Harris Colony at 0300, the way real storms always do, without warning and without mercy. Sergeant Anita Williams heard it first through the bulkhead, a low resonance that sat somewhere below the range of human hearing, more felt than heard. The kind of vibration that loosened fillings and made your back molars ache. She was already sitting up on her bunk, boots half on, before the alarm klaxon caught up to what her body already knew. 22 years in the IMC Frontier Corps had trained her spine to read threats the way other people read words. She didn't need the alarm. She was already moving. The colony of Harris Station clung to the southern coast of Talos IV the way barnacles cling to a seawall, stubbornly, without dignity, against all sensible advice. It was a refueling depot and a way station, and a place where desperate people came when they had nowhere else to go. 412 civilians, a skeleton garrison of 31 militia. And now, according to the seismic array that was screaming itself apart on her HUD, something enormous was moving through the continental shelf toward the coast. Williams hit the command floor at a run, datapad already in hand. "Talk to me," she said. Corporal Reyes was at the sensor station, her face the color of old chalk. "It came off the deep shelf, Sergeant. Mass displacement readings are..." She stopped, swallowed. "They're not in the calibrated range. The system keeps trying to categorize it as instrument error." "Is it instrument error?" "No, ma'am." Williams looked at the tactical display. A smear of amber light was moving through the dark water topography of Talos Affi's Western Ocean, steady and purposeful, aimed directly at the seawall. She had seen prowler packs on this display. She had seen pirate incursions and weather events, and one memorable occasion when a rogue harvester drone the size of a grain silo had come loose from its moorings and drifted into the shipping lanes. She had never seen anything like this. "Wake the colony," she said. "Move the civvies to the interior bunkers. I want all militia elements armed and staged at the seawall in 10 minutes. Reyes was already on the comm. Williams turned and found Private Ramirez at her elbow, helmet under one arm. Expression carefully neutral in that way that young soldiers learn early when they want to look brave and are mostly just terrified. "What is it?" he asked. "Something big," Williams said. "How big?" She looked back at the amber smear on the display. It was slowing now, spreading, coming shallow. "Bigger than anything we've trained for," she said, "which means we improvise." She said it with a steadiness she did not entirely feel. She had learned that from her brother once, long ago, the trick of wearing a calm face when the inside of you was white noise and adrenaline. Jackson had been better at it than her, truth be told. He'd had a gift for it, a gift for making the people around him believe that the situation was manageable, even when it wasn't. Even when the drop zone was hot and the LZ was compromised and the only sane choice was to call it and run. She pushed that thought down. Jackson was gone. That was old grief. She didn't carry it in front of soldiers. The seawall of Harris Station was a reinforced ceramite structure 12 meters high and 3 meters thick, built to withstand storm surges from Talos IV's notoriously violent seasonal cyclones. It ran a continuous arc for 2 kilometers along the colony's southern face, with automated cannon emplacements mounted at 100-meter intervals. The militia called it the Jaw, because from the air it looked like the lower mandible of something vast and toothy, biting into the coastline. Williams reached the Jaw's central platform 8 minutes after the alarm sounded. Around her, militia soldiers were taking positions behind the cannon emplacements and at the firing slits cut into the seawall's face. The night was heavy and warm and smelled of brine and something else. Something organic and old, like low tide multiplied by orders of magnitude. The ocean was not calm. Even in the dark, she could see it, the surface of the water moving wrong. Not the churn of waves, but something beneath the waves, something that displaced water like a continent displacing air. The bioluminescence that normally gave Talos 5E's coastal waters their characteristic green-blue glow was being pushed up and outward in great sheets of cold light, like a spotlight moving under glass. "There," said Ramirez, pointing. The thing that came out of the water did not come out all at once. It came out the way a bad idea comes out, in stages, each stage worse than the last, each one forcing a recalculation of what you thought was possible. First, the carapace crested the surface. A dome of segmented chitin the color of deep-sea iron, studded with barnacle-like growths and trailing great ropes of kelp and detritus from the continental shelf. Then the limbs, not 2, not 4, not the number of limbs anything built like a terrestrial creature would have. 8 primary limbs, each one the length of a dropship, each jointed in multiple places in ways that joints were not supposed to bend. Then the secondary manipulators, Dozens of them, smaller and faster, articulating with a precision that was almost mechanical. Then the head, if head was the right word, a cluster of sensory organs ringed by mouthparts, each one capable of independent movement, the whole assembly swiveling slowly as it read the shoreline with whatever senses it used. The bioluminescence in the water showed it in pulses of cold blue light. It was, Williams calculated, approximately 90 meters from the base of its rearmost limb to the apex of its carapace. The Jaws' automated cannons had already engaged. She could hear the steady percussion of their firing. Smart rounds, proximity fused, designed to defeat hardened targets. They were doing approximately nothing. The rounds were striking the carapace and fragmenting against it, and the creature was not reacting to them in any meaningful way. Not aggression, not pain, not even the mild irritation of an animal bothered by insects. Pure indifference. All militia. Hold fire, Williams said on the open channel. Non-automatic weapons are confirmed ineffective against primary carapace. Stand by. She cycled through the colony's inventory on her datapad. They had the wall cannons, which had already proven useless. They had 3 tripod-mounted heavy plasma lances, man-portable, rated for hardened vehicle armor. They had the colony's single Titan-class work mech, a 40-year-old industrial unit used for moving construction materials, currently in the repair bay with one arm off its frame. They had no orbital fire support, no air assets, no reinforcements within 6 hours of a signal. What they had was 31 people with guns and approximately no good options. Rise, she said over the command channel. What's the weak point analysis on something this size? Any biology on record? Searching, Reyes said. Then, there's something in the deep fauna survey from the original colony survey. Coastal megafauna of Talus 5 Western Shelf. Gilled respiratory structures. The gills would be on the lateral aspects of the thorax, below the carapace rim. The survey notes that in similar organisms, gill damage causes disorientation, possibly pain response, possibly retreat behavior. Yes, ma'am, possibly. What about that possibly? The survey was done by orbital spectroscopy. Nobody's actually stood next to one of these. That's us then, Williams said. We're the data. She found Corporal Desta at the eastern cannon platform, keeping herself small behind the ceramite barrier in a way that suggested she was doing the math on her own mortality. Williams crouched beside her. I need you on the plasma lance, Williams said. Eastern lateral aspect of the thorax. You're going for the gills. You confirmed that as a weak point? I confirmed it as the best theory we have. Desta looked at her. Then she looked at the creature, which was now moving its forelimbs over the top of the seawall and beginning to test the structure's resistance. The ceramite groaned. Right, Desta said, and reached for the plasma lance. What happened in the next 9 minutes was the kind of thing that Williams would later struggle to describe accurately. Not because she was confused, but because the English for describing engagements was built around human-scale adversaries. And nothing about this engagement was human-scale. The creature came over the wall, not through it, over it. It lifted the top 6 meters of the jaw's eastern section like a person lifts a piece of paper, not with effort but with casual structural inevitability. The ceramite shattered, and the soldiers on that section ran, and 2 of them didn't make it away from the falling debris. Williams marked their beacons on her display, without stopping moving. The creature's first limb came down on the outer courtyard of the colony, with a concussive impact that knocked people off their feet for 50 meters in every direction. The ground rang like a bell. Williams caught the rail of the central platform and held, and around her she could hear soldiers swearing in 3 languages, and somewhere behind her someone was crying. And she registered all of this and filed it away and kept thinking, because the thinking was the job. The plasma lances were firing. She could see the bolts striking the lateral thorax, and something was happening there. The creature's secondary manipulators were moving toward the impact points, with a speed and intensity it hadn't shown before. Attention, interest, pain maybe. She filed that too. Keep hitting the laterals, she said. All plasma lance teams, concentrate fire on the lateral thorax. Irregular intervals, don't let it predict the pattern. She was moving through the chaos toward the repair bay, because she had made a decision, and the decision was the Titan mech. The mech was called Gregor, which was not an acronym. It was just the name the maintenance crew had given it when they were feeling whimsical. It was olive green and scarred, and had been repaired so many times that its original manufacturer would probably not have recognized it. Its right arm was off its frame, sitting in a wall bracket where it had been removed 2 weeks ago for elbow joint refabrication. The maintenance chief, a compact man named Voight, was standing in front of it with a welder in one hand and an expression of profound professional offense on his face. "Tell me it walks," Williams said. "The locomotion systems are fine. The right arm is literally hanging on the wall. Can you put it back? In 2 weeks with proper tooling. In 10 minutes with improvised tooling." Voight looked at the arm. He looked at the mech. He looked at the sounds coming through the repair bay's walls. The impacts, the distant cracking of ceramite, the percussion of the plasma lances. He picked up a different welder. "It won't be pretty," he said. "It doesn't need to be pretty. The joint will have maybe 40% load tolerance. Understood. If you put it through a heavy strike, the arm comes off. Understood. And if the arm comes off during Voight..." She put a hand on his shoulder. 10 minutes. He went to work. Williams went back to the command channel. "Desta status. We've got it slowed down. It keeps pulling back from the lateral hits. I think it hurts, Sergeant." "Good. Keep it hurting. I need 6 more minutes on the wall. We've lost the eastern section completely. It's in the outer courtyard. If it reaches the hab ring, it won't. 6 minutes." She said it with the confidence she had practiced, the confidence that wasn't a lie but wasn't quite the truth either. The kind of confidence that was really just a decision that the outcome she was describing was the one they were going to make happen. Because they were going to find the way to make it happen, because that was the job. And they were the people doing the job, and there was no one else. She thought about Jackson again briefly and pushed it back down. Gregor's arm went back on in 9 minutes. The weld was ugly, and the joint moved with a grinding reluctance that made Voight visibly wince, but it moved. Williams climbed into the cockpit, which smelled of hydraulic fluid and old coffee, and ran the startup sequence, and the mech stood up, and the ceiling of the repair bay turned out to be lower than she'd remembered. "Sorry about the roof," she told Voight. "Go," he said. She went through the repair bay wall instead of the door, because the door was the wrong direction, and came out into the outer courtyard, with the talus of fourth night sky above her and the creature directly ahead. From the Titan mech's cockpit, 12 meters up, she had a view of it she hadn't had from the wall. She could see the gills now, broad, filamentous structures on the creature's lateral thorax, red-flushed with recent plasma burns quivering. She could see its secondary manipulators pulling back from those sites, protecting them. Pain behavior. Real pain. She could also see 3 of her militia soldiers trapped behind a collapsed section of HAB prefab, unable to move without stepping into the creature's sightline. Ramirez was one of them. He looked up and saw the mech and did not look relieved, exactly, but looked like relief was something he might dare to consider. "Williams," he said over the comm, and then stopped because there wasn't anything to say. "Stay small," she told him. "I'll get it looking at me." She walked Gregor forward. The creature felt the footsteps before it saw her. Its sensory cluster rotated, tracking the vibration, and then it saw the mech, and all of its secondary manipulators came up and oriented forward, and it made a sound. Not sound exactly. A pressure wave in the infrasonic range that Gregor's cockpit dampeners turned into a low roar. It was the first sound she had heard it make. She took it as communication. "You're smaller than me," it was saying. "You know that. Why are you still here?" "Because this is our colony," she said aloud in the cockpit, where no one could hear her but herself. She drove Gregor's left fist into the creature's right gill cluster at full extension. The response was immediate and total. The creature screamed. Actually screamed this time, audible, a sound that shook the colony's remaining windows in their frames. And all 8 primary limbs convulsed outward, which knocked Gregor sideways and sent Williams hard into the restraint harness and broke something in the cockpit's instrument panel that she didn't have time to identify. She corrected, got the mech's feet under it and hit the gills again. Behind the creature, she could see her soldiers moving. Ramirez and the 2 with him, sprinting for the cover of the intact hab ring. She kept the creature's attention. She absorbed another strike from a primary limb that sheared Gregor's right arm off at the badly welded joint. Just as Voight had predicted, and she rolled with it and came up on one knee and hit the gill cluster again with the left fist, which was still attached, and the creature screamed again and began to back away. "Desta," she said. "Plasma lances, all of them, lateral thorax, everything you have right now." The plasma lances opened up. 6 shots in 4 seconds, 3 from each of the surviving units, all hitting within a meter of where Gregor's fist had already struck. The creature's reaction was extreme. It folded inward, its secondary manipulators clutching at the gill sites, its primary limbs no longer advancing, its whole enormous mass pulling back and, for a moment that Williams would replay for the rest of her life, becoming something other than inevitable. It was big enough to be inevitable. It had come out of the ocean like a force of nature, like something that didn't negotiate with obstacles. It just erased them. And now it was hurting. Now it was uncertain. Now it was making the calculation that something vastly smaller than it had found the one thing it didn't want to be hit in, and was hitting it systematically, and the math was changing. She drove Gregor forward one more time, bellowing on the open comm channel. Not orders, just volume. The thing you yell when you are 31 people and one busted mech against a creature the size of a building, and you need it to understand that you are not done. And she hit the gill cluster one last time, with everything the mech's damaged frame could put behind it. The creature retreated. Not a tactical withdrawal, not a pause. A genuine retreat, turning in the colony's outer courtyard with a radius so large that it demolished what remained of the eastern seawall section, and moving back toward the water with the same massive inevitable momentum it had arrived with, but moving away now, each step sending tremors through the colony's foundation. And then it was in the shallows. And then it was deeper. And then the bioluminescent water closed over its carapace. And then the colony of Harris Station was quiet for the first time in 43 minutes. Williams sat in the ruined cockpit of Gregor, one arm gone, hydraulic fluid dripping from the instrument panel, and listened to the quiet. "Casualties," she said when she could trust her voice. Reyes answered. 7 wounded, 2 critical, 2 confirmed dead from the wall collapse. Williams closed her eyes. "Open them. All militia elements, begin sweep of the outer courtyard. I want structural integrity reports on every hab ring within the hour. Medical to the triage station. Sergeant." That was Ramirez, from outside the cockpit. He'd climbed up the side of the mech, and was looking in through the cracked canopy. His face was dusty, and there was blood from somewhere on his left ear, and his eyes were the eyes of someone who has recently recalculated what the universe is capable of. It actually worked. It worked, the gill thing, the gill thing. He was quiet for a moment. "How did you know to try the mech?" "I didn't know," she said. "I figured it was worth trying." He looked at the ocean, at the retreating bioluminescence in the deep water, fading now, moving off into the dark continental shelf. "You just kept going at it. Even after the wall came down, even after the arm came off. That's the job. Most people would have. I'm not most people." She said it without arrogance. "Matter of fact, and neither are you. None of us are. We just proved that." She looked at the colony around them. Damaged, diminished, but standing. The lights were still on in the hab ring. She could see a child's face at one of the windows, small and pale, watching. "Start the sweep. We've got a lot of work before morning." The work before morning lasted 4 days. Harris Station's eastern seawall was a total loss and needed to be entirely rebuilt. The outer courtyard had to be cleared of debris and surveyed for structural compromise. The colony's medical staff, all 3 of them, worked in rotating shifts to keep the critical wounded stable until the emergency transport from the central hub could arrive. The Titan mech Gregor was dragged into the repair bay, and Voight stood in front of it for a long time, with the expression of a man contemplating the sins of the universe, and then began making a list of parts. Williams worked. She had always worked. It was how she processed things. Not through grief or reflection, or the long conversations other people seemed to need, but through the physical fact of putting herself between the task and the completion of the task. She supervised the wall surveys and signed off on the triage reports, and ran the debriefs, and wrote the incident log, which ran to 47 pages. Because the thing you had encountered needed to be recorded accurately, so that the next person who encountered it would have a better chance than you'd had. On the second day, the supply transport arrived from the central hub, and on it was a man she didn't know. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing civilian work clothes, and a repaired Cortex shield on his forearm that looked like salvage from a military unit. The kind of personal armor that people carried when they had once been somewhere dangerous and had learned not to trust the absence of it. His face was unfamiliar, his build was not, the way he moved was not. Williams was supervising the unloading of the construction materials on the landing pad. When he came down the ramp and stopped and looked at her the way people look at something, they aren't sure they're seeing correctly. She turned and looked at him. She knew his jaw. She knew the way his shoulders sat, the particular proportion of height to breadth that had looked exactly the same across the breakfast table when she was 7 years old and he was 9. And neither of them had any idea what they were going to become. "Hi, Anita," said her dead brother. Williams did not say anything for a long time. Behind her, Ramirez and 2 other militia soldiers had stopped working, and were watching with the carefully neutral faces of people trying to look like they weren't watching something intensely personal. "Jackson," she finally said. "Yeah, you're dead. I know that's what everyone thinks. I thought that. I've thought that for 4 years." He was quiet. He had the Cortex shield off his arm and was turning it in his hands, which was something he had always done when he was trying to figure out how to say something. 4 years ago and 20 years before that, same gesture. She felt the anger and the grief and the relief arrive simultaneously and occupy the same space, which made her chest tight and her hands want to do something purposeful. "There are reasons," he said. "I'll explain them, all of them. I owe you that. You owe me considerably more than that." "Yes." She looked at him. He looked back. He hadn't flinched from her anger, which was also something he had always done. The capacity to stand in front of a confrontation without retreating from it, even when the confrontation was warranted. Even when the person you were standing in front of had every right to be as angry as they were. "Why are you here?" she said. "Because the colony got hit by something we don't have a category for, and the central hub is treating it as a local incident. And I've been watching the patrol logs for 3 years, and I know it's not a local incident. The deep fauna of the Western Shelf are moving. Something's driving them inshore. I don't know what yet, but you've been watching the patrol logs. For this colony, yes. Because of me." He didn't answer, which was an answer. She turned away and looked at the half-unloaded transport and the half-repaired wall and the colony of 412 people that was still standing because 31 militia soldiers had refused to stop hitting a 90-meter creature in the gills. "Help us finish the unload," she said. "Then we'll talk." He put the Cortex shield back on his arm. "Okay." They talked that evening, sitting on the seawall's western section where it was still intact, looking out over the water. The bioluminescence was active tonight, green and blue, and the occasional deep red pulse from something large moving far offshore. Harris Station's replacement wall sections were being delivered at first light, and the construction crews were already staged. And for a few hours there was nothing to supervise. And Anita Williams sat with her brother, who was not dead, and listened to him explain. He had been separated from his unit during an operation she had known only the public version of. The private version was worse. The private version involved things that no one had filed reports on, in the way that things which are too terrible to file reports on accumulate in the gaps between official records. He had spent 2 years making his way back through systems where he was not supposed to be. And when he had finally gotten somewhere safe, he had found that a version of him was officially dead. And he had discovered that being officially dead had certain advantages for a person who needed to do certain kinds of work without attracting attention. He had not come back earlier, he said, because he was afraid she would try to pull him out of it, because she would have wanted to, and he would have wanted her to succeed, and there were people who needed him to be the version that no one was looking for. "That's either very noble or very selfish," she said. "Probably both," he said. "Definitely both." The water moved in the dark. Somewhere out there the creature was still alive. Hurt and retreating, but alive. The incident report from the seismic array suggested it had gone back to the deep shelf, well below the continental margin, which was what the biologists on the transport had called, probably a pain response to thermal gradient change. Probably the same word Reyes had used. The word that preceded every category of thing that had not yet been documented. Because documentation required proximity, and proximity to things like that required people willing to stand between an unstoppable force and the people it was going to go through. "There are more of them," Jackson said. "Not this species necessarily. But whatever is driving the deep fauna inshore, it's a systematic displacement. Something in the deep ocean is pushing everything toward the surface and the coasts. You have evidence. I have incomplete evidence and a pattern that doesn't fit any natural cycle on record. You need the colony's seismic array data, that would help. And you need somewhere to work from." He looked at her. "I'm not pulling you in," she said. "I'm telling you the offer is there if you want a base of operations. We have space in the garrison block. The cafeteria is bad, but it's consistent." She paused. "And I'd like to know my brother isn't dead. That's a separate thing from the strategic consideration, but it's a real thing." He was quiet for a moment. The bioluminescence pulsed in the deep water, red deep and slow. "I didn't know how to come back," he said. "I thought after enough time it would be easier. It wasn't." "No," she said. "It wasn't. I'm sorry, Anita." She thought about the anger she had carried for 4 years. The particular weight of grief that is also abandonment, the way she had put it down and picked it up, and put it down again and kept picking it up because some things don't stay put. She thought about the last 4 days. The seawall and Gregor and Ramirez's face when the creature finally turned, and the way she had felt, in the cockpit with the arm gone and the instrument panel cracked, some kind of bedrock certainty that she was not done. That done was not a thing she was willing to be. Don't apologize, she said. Just stay. He looked at the water. She looked at the water. After a while, she said, the Garrison cafeteria really is bad. How bad? The coffee tastes like the can it came in. I've had worse. I know. I've had the same worse. That's why I'm warning you. He almost smiled. It was the same almost smile, 4 years later, and a weight of history heavier, still the same. She had her brother back, and the colony was damaged, and there was something in the deep ocean driving a migration pattern that no one had a category for. And the water was glowing in the dark, with the lives of creatures that had been down there in the deep for longer than Harris Station, or the Frontier Corps or human beings on this planet had existed. She didn't know what was coming. She knew her job, and she knew her people, and she knew, with the certainty that lives in your chest, not your head, that those two things were going to be enough. They had been enough 4 days ago when a creature the size of a building had come out of the sea, and they had hid it until it went back in. They would be enough for whatever came next. They always were. It was the most human thing she knew. Over the next 6 weeks, Jackson Williams, who had given himself the call sign Newcastle on the encrypted networks he used, a name from a place that meant something to him that he had not yet explained, became a fixture of Harris Station. He ate bad cafeteria coffee and helped rebuild the seawall and proved, in the way that competent people always prove themselves, not through announcement, but through simply being useful in crisis after crisis. The data he was collecting was alarming. The seismic array confirmed his pattern. Something in the deep western shelf was displacing the bottom dweller populations systematically, driving them up the thermal gradient and toward coastal systems. He called it a pulse. Not a natural predator displacement, not a breeding migration, something else. Something that left traces in the geological record that the colony survey had flagged as anomalous, and then failed to follow up on because the survey team had moved on to the next star system. Williams listened to his briefings and asked the questions that needed asking and made the hard calls about resource allocation that were her job to make. On day 41, the seismic array went critical again. This time it was not one creature. The return signatures on the deep array were multiple. 7 distinct mass displacement events moving in formation from the deep shelf, which was a behavior pattern that no previously documented megafauna of Talos 4 had ever displayed. Formation movement suggested something that the biologists on the earlier transport had said was theoretically impossible for creatures of this class. Coordination. Jackson was at her side when the alert came in. He looked at the display for a long time. They learn, he said. How fast? Fast enough. William straightened up. She looked around the command floor. Rhea, Ramirez, Desta, Voight, who had come up from the repair bay because he had an instinct for when his expertise would be needed. The militia of Harris Station, 31 people who had already done something that the tactical manuals said couldn't be done, and who were going to be asked to do it again, but harder. She thought about how to say what she needed to say. The thing we did 6 weeks ago, she began. The thing where we found the weak point and hit it until the problem retreated. We're going to do that again. 7 times. 7, Ramirez said. 7. With the same resources. With the same resources, she said. Plus the wall repairs and Gregor's new arm, which Voight tells me is rated for actual load tolerance now. Voight made a modest gesture that suggested this was true, but he wasn't going to brag about it. It worked once, Desta said. Biological systems have, if they've learned to coordinate, they may have learned to protect the weak point. Which is why we don't go for the same weak point the same way, Williams said. We go for what's actually true. These things are large and they are hard to stop, but they are not invulnerable. Nothing is invulnerable. Every system has the thing it can't protect against, and our job is to find that thing and be the people who are willing to get close enough to use it. She said it the way she always said the hard things. Not like a speech, not like a declaration, but like a fact she was reading off a display. This is the data. This is what it means. This is what we do with it. Around her, her people were nodding. Not because she had inspired them, exactly. Because she had told them the truth in a way that left no gap between the truth and the action it required. Jackson, she said. He had been standing slightly apart, the way people who are newly returned stand, present but uncertain of the geometry, uncertain of how much space they're allowed to take up. He met her eyes. "You're with me," she said. It was not a question. It was not a request. He put the Cortex shield on his arm and checked the charge on his weapon and said, "Always." The 7 creatures came ashore at first light. What happened over the next 2 hours would be written up in the incident report that Williams filed 3 days later, which ran to 114 pages, and included a supplementary appendix on newly identified bioluminescent fauna response patterns that would eventually be cited in the official xenobiological survey of Talos the Foy's western shelf. It would be read by people who had not been there, in places far from Harris Station, and some of them would find it difficult to believe that 31 militia soldiers, with 1 repaired industrial mech and 3 plasma lance teams, had accomplished what the report described. But the report was accurate. They used the seawall's remaining emplacements as a diversion, drawing the creatures' attention while the plasma lance teams moved to flanking positions. Jackson's Cortex shield proved its value repeatedly. The technology, which could expand from forearm-mounted to a full-body barrier in under a second, was something none of the creatures had apparently encountered before. They had learned to protect their gills. They had not learned to account for a barrier they couldn't read, and when the barrier came up between their secondary manipulators and their target, their response was the hesitation of any creature that encounters something new. Brief, fatal uncertainty. Williams and Gregor drove through the center of the formation and broke it apart. She took hits. The mech took hits. Voight, watching from the repair bay's external camera, would later say that he had closed his eyes at least 4 times. But the arm stayed on, and the feet stayed under it, and Williams kept moving, because that was what you did. The creatures retreated, not one at a time, together, which was the part that sat with Williams afterward, standing in the outer courtyard, with the smoke of plasma burns still drifting in the morning air, and her brother beside her, and the bioluminescent ocean moving south along the coast, carrying its enormous retreating shapes into the deep. They had learned. They had coordinated. They had adapted their protection behavior based on a single prior encounter, and they had still turned and left, not because they were defeated, in any permanent sense. They would return. The thing driving them inshore would continue driving them, and they would adapt further, and what had worked today would need to change. But today it had worked. "They'll be back," Jackson said. "I know. In larger numbers. With different behaviors. I know that too. You don't seem particularly worried." She looked at the ocean. The luminescence was fading as the creatures went deeper, the cold light shrinking and dimming and going out, one by one, until the water was just water in the early morning light. "We'll adapt," she said. "We're good at that." "Humans, you mean?" "Humans," she said. "This particular set of them specifically. We found the gills. We'll find the next thing." She turned and looked at the colony, still standing, still lit children's faces at windows. The colony rising up from the wreckage of its own outer ring, with the stubbornness of a thing that has decided it is not finished. "We always find the next thing. It's what we do." Ramirez was limping toward them across the courtyard, arm in a temporary brace, with an expression on his face that was trying to be professional and not entirely managing it. "Sergeant," he said. "Corporal, I think we need more coffee fee." "The cafeteria kind? Probably yes," she nodded. "Then let's go get some." She walked across the outer courtyard of Harris Station with her brother on one side, and her soldier on the other, and the colony rebuilding itself around her, and the deep ocean behind her, and whatever was coming in it, and she thought, "We've got a lot of work before morning." She always did, and they always got it done.